the Sounds True Podcast Network.
Who we think we are right now is nothing more than this whirlpool. That is an avatar. When we die, just like the nighttime avatar dissolving into your mind stream, we are going to dissolve into the stream of mind at large. That's what death is.
Hi friends, I'm Tami Simon, and since I was young, I've had a nagging feeling that I didn't prepare properly for my death the last time around, and I don't want to make that same mistake again. Now, of course, maybe this was just a child's imagination, but questions like, am I actually ready to die? And is there continuity after death? And if so, what continues? These are questions across cultures and across time that have pushed inner explorers to inquire more deeply and learn more. Welcome to this special Insights at the Edge series, once more, exploring reincarnation and the gap between lives. Stay with us. In this episode of Insights at the Edge, my guest is Andrew Holecek. Andrew is an interdisciplinary scholar practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism and other non-dual wisdom traditions. He is a beautiful teacher, and he has a gift for both understanding esoteric texts and teachings and making them accessible to people. He's the author of 9 books and many articles on dream yoga, meditation, the art of dying, and the practice of dark retreat. Andrew is a friend. Many of his books and audio learning programs are published through Sounds True. Most recently, a book and audiobook on reverse meditation, how to use pain and difficult emotions as a doorway to inner freedom, and a book called I'm Mindful, Now What? On moving beyond mindfulness to meet the modern world. Andrew, welcome.
Tami, so nice to see you again, and thank you for such a kind and generous introduction.
This special series is exploring reincarnation, what
Cool.
we know, what we don't know, and how an immersion in such a study might change us and might change how we live our lives, prepare for our death, and even go through the dying process. And I know this is something you know so much about from your deep study of Tibetan Buddhism and all the work you've done to help people prepare to die. So here at the beginning, to set the stage, could you share with us the Tibetan Buddhist map of reincarnation?
Yeah. Whoa, here we go. Let's go to the deep end and spread it wide. Yeah, this issue of rebirth, amazingly a profound, compelling topic that the Tibetans really have rolled with in an extraordinarily articulate and elegant way. And so as you know, but perhaps for edification with our listeners, this is part of what's called Bardo yoga. Bardo is a Tibetan word, B-A-R-D-O, that means in between, transitional process, or gap. And as we'll see, and this is where it will get important, I think, for us in a few minutes, it's a wonderfully multivalent principle, which means what I'm going to share not only applies to what happens at the end of life and beyond, but just as importantly, perhaps even more so, this process / phenomenology, using some geek speak, takes place moment to moment to moment. And so briefly, this is a vast corpus of teachings, but they talk about the 3 death bardos, the painful bardo of dying, which is what takes place when you either afflicted with a disease that will end in your death, or in a certain way, we start to slide into the bardo of dying once we stop growing up. And so at the end of that bardo, then one slides into what's called the luminous bardo of dharmata. Dharmata is a Sanskrit word that means isness, suchness, or reality. And Tami, what it basically refers to, it's the Tibetan way of talking about the non-dual awakened state. One actually descends or ascends, depending on what metaphor or image you want to use, into the nature of one's mind, into the nature of reality. And then if one doesn't have a level of recognition or familiarity with that space, and without some kind of preparation, which is what Bardo yoga is all about, recognition does not take place. And so then one slides into the third Bardo, which is called the karmic Bardo of becoming, or the habitual Bardo of becoming. And this is where things get really interesting for the topic we're going to explore today, because this is where the process of rebirth from life to life is described in exquisite detail. And I think just to make it practical for people so they're not too intimidated by this Tibetan map, it's important to understand that habit is a Western translation of karma. And so basically what this leads to, I think in terms of an important point, is a very interesting topic that ties into, well, what is it that reincarnates? What is it that takes rebirth? Well, as you know, one of our mutual teachers, the radical Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, once said when he was asked, what is it that reincarnates? Your bad habits. It's a stunning insight. And so the power of habit, the power of karma, is the driver behind the process of rebirth, whether it's moment to moment, night to night, or life to life. And so this is another thing to tie in, is how these teachings on the Bardos in rebirth apply, like I intimated earlier, not only to what happens at the end of this life. Every single night, we have a kind of preview of coming attractions. We go through a concordant experience of these three Bardos. We can talk about that. And then in an even more subtle, kind of microcosmic, microgenetic expression, this process is taking place right now.
So there's so much here, Andrew, and I want to make it very real and palpable for people. Yeah. And as I mentioned, you're a scholar practitioner, and I want to zoom in on the practitioner, or we could say the personal front for a moment. And I'll share personally in a way to invite you to, which is I recently went through a really, really difficult period of my life where I would say I experienced something like a disassemblage or a dying and a gap in that space. And I'm now in a new process of becoming, and it gave me insight into what might happen, at least analogously, metaphorically, through an experience of a dark passage in my own life. And I wonder if you could take this teaching of the Bardo yoga and apply it to a passage in your life that might help it be very real for people right here at the outset.
This is so great, Tami. Yeah, because these teachings can be a little bit esoteric, almost otherworldly. And part of my charter, I had to retrofit what I seem to be doing in this life is acting as a kind of cultural translator to take these amazing teachings from the alleged East and bring them into a vocabulary and a set of experiences that we can relate to in the West. So spot on. So many examples, but one would be the end of a relationship. I mean, when my first marriage fell apart, boy, talk about painful Bardo dying. You know, letting go is a euphemism for death. And so when that relationship fell apart, I was in a heap of hurt. It was really difficult to let go. And because I was forced to, I was basically then sent into this very uncomfortable, kind of open, groundless space where all my usual habit patterns and reference points were taken away. The image really is like the rug underneath your feet is just pulled out from underneath you, right? And you're sent flying. And we can talk a little bit more about this later, about how this particular image, and I'll share a story, can be quite revelatory and compelling. This idea of the ultimate rug being your very body being pulled out at the moment of death. But we can come back to that. So here I am, end of a relationship, really uncomfortable, sent into a very uncomfortable, indeterminate open space. That's Bardo. That's classic Bardo. It's neither here nor there. It's very fleeting. It's groundless. It's uncomfortable. And so the way I was able to bring in Bardo principles here, Tami, and I think this is the point, is I notice the almost relentless, insatiable habit pattern of taking immediate rebirth. In other words, boy, let's find somebody else. Let's get something to fill this space. Let's get some ground underneath your feet so you feel comfortable. And so right here, we see the power of habit coming in, the power of karma. Because if we're not familiar with hanging out in this ambiguous, liminal, groundless space, then all our patterns that are fundamentally driven by egoic agendas underneath come roaring back into play. And then this will then hurl us habitually into the karmic bardo of becoming, where, hey, let's get somebody else to fill this empty space in my bed. Let's immediately take rebirth. And this is where in the bardo literature, I think can become somewhat problematic, because if we're not comfortable hanging out in that open space, being more deliberate about our conscious choices, really thinking about what's going on, well, what hurls us then, like I mentioned earlier, is your habit patterns will take over. Another immediate example is when I lost a job. This is another one that takes place all the time. The only time in my life I was actually fired. And it was like, whoa, here's a sudden death. Here I am, just like, holy moly. I mean, I had a paycheck coming in every week. I had stability. I had constancy in my life gone. Right there, sudden death, Bardo dying, I was sent into wide open space. And so then again, geez, what am I going to do? Do I rush out and take the very next job? Am I comfortable hanging out in that space, even flying in it? If I can do that, if I can maintain a quality of openness, the ability to kind of stand on these shifting sands, then I can make much more intelligent decisions. I can take rebirth consciously, volitionally, intelligently, driven by insight and maybe even kindness and compassion for myself and others, instead of born, taking a form, so to speak, in a new job and a new relationship, just to fill the space. So I think right there, two big examples where these teachings were at my side and really helped me.
Very useful. I think everyone can relate to that. Now, you said what reincarnates, a question that I think, of course, is at the core of a series that's exploring reincarnation, are bad habits. But let me ask you a question, because in the examples that you gave, which I asked you to share, there's this sense of our awareness watching. Oh, I want to go get another relationship ASAP. I need some kind of confirmation of my worth and a new job ASAP. There's this sense of, there's awareness there that feels personal in some form, feels that way. Help me understand what the processing bubble is, if you will. Is it a subtle body that's passing through the bardo, where I'm, let's say, in the suchness, the luminous bardo, and there's an observation of some kind? Is there, like in life, of the bardo of becomings?
This is such a great question. So do I have permission to venture briefly into the deep end of the pool and to actually give people...
We're going to swim all over,
Let's do it.
We're going into the ocean.
Tami, let me do this with a contemplation, so that don't take my word for it. Check out what I'm going to say against your own experience. And so what I'm going to share here comes from, it's kind of a juxtaposition of the Bardo teachings. And I earlier said how they're related to sleep and dream. So I'm going to share a little bit about how this connects to what's called dream yoga, which I've written about, as you know, and also what's called sleep yoga connected to yoga nidra. And let me show you how this works. That is really interesting and really revelatory. And again, you can see this for yourself. So you got up this morning, and probably without reflection, you look back over the night and said, whoa, man, I slept great. I had some great dreams. I slept solidly. I woke up. Wow, this is awesome. Well, this is a complete illusion. This notion that I fell asleep, I had a dream, I woke up is a complete illusion. And so let's see how this really works and how you can test this out. And the only thing, so to speak, that ever goes through, there is no Tami, there is no Andrew, there is no individual self that falls asleep, dreams, and wakes up. It seems like that. Whoa, sure as heck seems like that, but appearance is not in harmony with reality, Tami, and this is why we suffer. So this contemplation that's related to dream yoga, which, by the way, this tradition of dream yoga came about principally as a way to prepare for death, which they call the dream at the end of time. How interesting is that? So check this out and then test it. The only thing that actually happens, there is no you that goes through this journey, even though it sure as heck seems like it. The only thing there ever is, and you intimated this, is complete, formless, and therefore deathless awareness itself. That's it. What creates the illusion, and this ties in beautifully to like, what is it that reincarnates? What creates the illusion that there's an I that's awake, there's an I that's dreaming, there's an I sleeping, an I waking up. Nothing more than various levels of contraction and expansion upon this formless awareness. And so let me just I'll say a little bit more and then we can talk about this. Right now, we're in the most contracted of all states. The state that is the most condensed, where space, time, causality, the very sense of self arise and we think we're fully operational. When we fall asleep, all that starts to relax. So right now, this is the mudra for the awakened state. As we fall asleep, and again, think of dying, it's the same thing. We start to partially relax. As we enter a partially open dimension, what we call the dream state, well, space, time, causality, they're softened, they're open, they're not fully operational, which is why we can do all these magnificent, miraculous things in the dream state. And by the way, if we're lucid to the space, parenthetically, this is what Thoreau once said, in dreams, we are our truest life awake. You're actually more in contact with the nature of reality if you're lucid in the dream state. So there's one more step. From here, fully awake.
With this is your in a fist. Your hands are in a fist.
Like you said, awareness is so contracted. Awareness is so appropriated. Awareness is so solid. This is what we mistake to be our very sense of self. So falling asleep and dying, they're virtually the same process occurring at two different steps. Basically, you start to come apart. You start to open. You start to relax. If you don't relax, you're not going to fall asleep. If you don't relax, you're not going to have a good, graceful exit when you die. So you partially open and relax. And then you keep opening and relaxing until you've completely opened into the full, deep, dreamless state. This is analogous to the luminous Bardo of Dharmata. In this space, like Ramana Maharshi, just very briefly, a wonderfully profound but somewhat cryptic statement, that which does not exist in deep, dreamless sleep isn't real. In other words, what exists in deep, dreamless sleep is complete, empty, formless awareness itself. But because we don't recognize it, and here's a rebirth thing, think not only night to night, but life to life. Because we're so identified with contracted, solidified, reified form, partially identified with the dream state, we think there's still a dreamer, but we're definitely not identified with the complete formless, open dimensions of mind. When we fall asleep or when we die, there's a little thought bubble that says, hey, wait a second, that's not me. I'm not nothing, I'm something. That's not me. I'm not nobody, I'm somebody. And so therefore, then the habit pattern of what we are the most familiar with, which is this wake state, kicks back into gear. And what does it do, Tami? It contracts against this space. It contracts against this open awareness. That contraction then is precisely, and the metaphor here is really quite beautiful. What is it that delivers us in this world? The contractions of our mother. What is it that gives birth to our self-sense moment to moment? The contractions of grasping. And so here, at this deepest kind of philosophical level, our inability to recognize, rest, and relax in this vast, infinite open space, we whiplash in our collision with the infinite, and we contract back into a dimension that we are familiar with. And this is where we're going to take rebirth, life to life, moment to moment, or night to night. We're going to take rebirth into a dimension, the degree of openness we can tolerate. And so if we can't tolerate complete infinite openness, and most of us can't because there's no place for personal identity there, we contract away from it. Contract, contract, fall into a dimension we are familiar with. Form, body, self. And then we say, yes, that's me. And this is where we take rebirth. This is what we wake up to every morning. According to the Tibetan view, this is what we're going to wake up to after we die. And so you can get a very powerful preview of coming attractions to watch how your mind falls asleep, dreams, and wakes up every single night. So I know this is subtle. I know it's a little bit deep, but this is also something you can start to practice as a contemplation. Is it in fact true? Do I actually fall asleep, dream, and wake up? WTF is going on? You can feel this. That's why I like the use of the word contraction and openness. And so then you can start to see for yourself, wait a second, this is bloody interesting. Now pause there, because the next step would be to see how this happens moment to moment, because it's a little deep.
Now, you mentioned dream yoga, and with Sounds True, you've published a book on dream yoga. And if I understand correctly, the first phase has to do with lucid dreaming. And the question I have for you is the awareness that one has in a lucid dream. How would you describe that? Is that some type of sort of transitional place where I'm influencing things and I'm acting? And how does that relate to being in the luminous Bardo?
This is such a great question. Yeah, so exactly right. So a lucid dream, just like you said, is when you're dreaming and you know that you're dreaming. Something clues you into the fact that, wait a second, I can't do this in waking life. I must be dreaming. You wake up and you're still in the dream. And so parenthetically, Tami, this is precisely what this tradition says will take place when we die if we're not lucid to or aware of the process. In other words, our lucidity or lack thereof at the dream at the end of time in the bardos is precisely what's going to kind of drive the rebirth reincarnational process. And so this is such a great rich bridge you're talking about, because take a look at your mind tonight. If you don't wake up to become lucid in your dreams, what controls your dreams? Your habits, your karma, your unconscious mind, which is why my dear friend Bob Thurman says so brilliantly, it's not safe to die as long as you have an unconscious mind, because that's what's going to dictate the rebirth process. You can see this every night. So you're in a lucid dream, to come back to your question. Well, what distinguishes lucid dreaming from dream yoga? Lucid dreaming, you can do all kinds of things for entertainment. You can fly, you can have sex, you can do whatever you want. But what they don't tell you is whenever intention is involved, even at the level of a dream, habit or karma is created. So what dream yoga does is it uses lucid dreaming as a platform, and instead of fulfilling your wildest fantasies and creating bad habits and karma, you use this liquid, empty, fluid dimension of mind for the purposes of waking up, for spiritual transformation, so that you can eventually attain complete lucidity in the dream state, and therefore complete control. And this is what allegedly the great wisdom masters from any tradition, I mean, the Buddha, the awakened one, the ultimate lucid dreamer, any ultimate lucid dreamer from any tradition has such a heightened level of awareness and therefore control that they literally never black out. They maintain a 24/7 type of awareness, exactly the type of awareness that can be cultivated with this little dream contemplation we did. But the practice here, and then I'll pause, is with dream yoga, you engage in a series of steps. I outline them in the book Dream Yoga that I published with you guys, developing more and more refined abilities to control the dream, which is what? What is a dream made of? It's made of your mind. It's just a way to control your mind. And then that very proficiency extends naturally into the death space. Padmasambhava, the great master who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet, he he says / guarantees that if you can attain lucidity in the nighttime dream 7 to 9 times, this is an archetypal number, Tami, don't take it literally. It just represents some level of constancy and proficiency in lucid dreaming and dream yoga. He says that you will then wake up in the dream at the end of time, the bardos, and therefore be able to take control over the entire journey. Because if you don't, what's going to take control? Just like in your dream last night, your habits, your karma. So I'll pause there because there's more to say.
Well, I think I still keep coming up with this question.
Okay.
What or who is in control or influencing a decision-making process at that point when you're in lucidity? I still don't understand that.
Yeah, so there's degree. These questions are so great. So it depends on the degree of lucidity, right? So if there's no lucidity, right, what takes control, like I mentioned several times.
The bad habits, I feel I have a very good grip on.
We're familiar with our habits. We know that.
Yes.
Well, then what happens, Tami, that's so awesome, is through the process of retreat, literally retraction, stepping away. You mentioned earlier this notion of the witness. In Hindu language, this is called Turiya, the fourth. Developing this type of witness awareness that allows you to dispassionately but compassionately watch the entire display. This is an incredibly important but still provisional step into the full fruition of this journey. And this alone is colossal. If you can develop this capacity to witness whatever is arising in meditation now, to witness in the lucid dream, it's literally called witness lucid dreaming, witnessing what takes place in the dream without getting swept into it. This is huge. And so the reason I say there's one more step to go, because the witness, this gets super subtle, the witness still implies a very subtle duality, because if there's still a witness there's witness and witnessed. And so therefore you still have something perceiving something else. There's still, Tami, a very subtle contraction taking place. There's still a very subtle referencing. And you always know this when you either feel or say to yourself, I'm seeing that, I'm hearing that, I'm thinking that. Even your languaging reveals this. So when the mind continues to open, mind, body, heart, whatever, when your mind continues to open, even the witness fundamentally completely relaxes, opens, and dies. And then that basically, like a wave dissolving back into a river or a whirlpool dissolving back into a stream, then you, and everything here is in quotation marks because there is no you, then you dissolve into this formless stream of awareness, this formless dimension of mind. And so in order to understand who is perceiving what at this point, one literally has to change the way one thinks. And this is not easy. So I'll pause here to see if you want to go here. Because
I do. I'd like to understand this. Yeah.
Yeah. We whether we know it or not, we think in terms of things. It's literally called thing thinking. This is a type of thinking that you can trace back to Aristotle. I mean, he's not the sole generator of this perverse way. Obviously, you have Descartes and all these other Western massive thinkers. But we think in highly concretized, reified things. We think in terms of products, not process. So in order, and this is great. Let me say this. This is a great line. This comes from the Nobel physicist laureate, Brian Josephson. I love this line. We think that we think clearly, but that's only because we don't think clearly. It's fantastic. I mean, that's like just the way we roll. It's called axiomatic. It's a given. Well, it's not a given. It's a hand-me-down. It's a construct. We've been taught to think this way. So in order to enter the domain of what we're talking about here, and this is where the great wisdom traditions really step in with a massive helping hand, both Hinduism and Buddhism engage, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, in this elegant threefold pedagogical approach. this Indic approach. This is super important here, Tami, of hearing, contemplating, and meditating. Hearing is what we're doing here. I'm flapping my lips. You're reading a book. You're ingesting information. This is an issue today of TMI, and an issue because we confuse information for experience. Well, to go deeper into the contemplative arts, you hand off the baton, so to speak, to a more subtle dimension of contemplation. This is dropping into the more wisdom, refined dimensions of the body. This is where you start to digest the material. You start to reflect on it. You chew on it. You test it. Is it true what this guy is saying? Is it true what the Buddha said? Is it true what these amazing masters said? Kick the tires. Look under the hood. Check it out for yourself. As you work down through this pedagogical approach, it's kind of a filtration and purification system, because you start at the level of concept, which is still, reified, full of things and thinking, dualistic. You start to drop down, it filters away concepts. The experience becomes increasingly non-dual, less conceptual, and more embodied. And so contemplation, that's what we're doing here a little bit. And when people leave, they may think, whoa, this is really interesting. They're engaging in this digestive part. Well, the real crux is the following, Tami. The final step of meditation, or full-bodied incorporation, when you metabolize the teachings, ingest, digest, metabolize. And so what I'm saying, therefore, and this is not a cop-out. This is something you can see for yourself if you engage in this approach. You literally hand off these teachings, these more subtle dimensions of your being, and it is only in meditation, in deep non-conceptual gnosis, literally, that you say, aha, I got it. And so I say that because we can go all the way to the edge of this diving board. We can get super subtle in our conversation. But if we transition, in order to transition from thinking into the thinking of what Buddhists refer to as emptiness, which is not nothing but no thing, one has to literally transform the way one thinks and then transcend thinking altogether. So I'll pause because this may seem like a facile cop-out, but it's not.
I'm following you, Andrew. And I think thinking is subject-object thinking.
Dualistic.
And when I heard the term self-cognizing for the first time, it was a moment. I mean, I know it just sounds a little odd, but anyway, I have my own like nerdy streak. It's sort of strange and personal and not a neuro-conforming nerdy streak, but it's nerdy nonetheless. So when I heard that word, self-cognizing, it answered this question for me in a certain kind of way, as a different kind of cognition. And I wonder if you could explain that for people.
Yeah. Oh, woo, boy, here we go. This is so great. Yes. So what we're talking about here is literally a transformation, and dare I say, revolution in the way we know and the way we perceive. In geek speak, this is called epistemology. And so you're asking a deep question. I'm going to try to ping a correlative deep answer. So in order to transition from dualistic thinking, normal ways of knowing, into this non-dual, or sometimes called tantric epistemology, where subject, object, and consciousness no longer really abide, the only way to do this is to go through this approach until you get, and I can give another example. I will leave listeners with another way to look at this. So it's not just rhetoric. You literally transition from not really the type of cognizance that you're talking about, because that's a wonderful introduction, but still provisional step. You transition into what the Tibetans refer to as reflexive awareness. In other words, boy, it's so hard to put non-duality into dualistic terms. Even languaging this is difficult, but it ties into like who dies, who is experiencing this, who basically takes rebirth. Well, fundamentally, it's not a who. It's just, like I mentioned earlier, awareness in different renderings of contraction and expansion. And so at the deepest level, to come back to your earliest question, when the witness dissolves into that which is witness, now you're talking about non-duality. This is when awareness fundamentally rests in its own nature, and it knows itself. It's such a mind F from a Western perspective. It's like, I don't even know what that means. Well, let me give you a brief example. You may have to walk away with this. Most importantly, Tami, you may have to sleep on it. But this is a powerful way to see this for yourself. So can I hand out a brief dream yoga contemplation on this?
Please.
You can see this for yourself. So imagine any dream. You can close your eyes for just a second and reflect back on any dream. Doesn't matter, doesn't have to be lucid, just any dream. When you're in that dream, in a completely unexamined way, sure as heck seems to be a dream object there. You can't contest that. I'm having a dream. I'm experiencing all this stuff in the dream. Yes, I see that. And even when you're in the dream, it sure as heck seems like there's a dreamer. Yes, we wake up in the morning and we say, I had a dream. So when you're in the dream and you have this is what just parenthetically is called threefold impurity, dualistic knowing. Subject, object, and consciousness. I'm perceiving the dream. Sure as heck seems that way, doesn't it? And when you wake up the next day, we can do it now, and you look back upon that dream, this is classic dream yoga contemplation, you can start to ask yourself and inquire to some really interesting investigations. From this perspective, looking back on the dream, yes, sure as heck seems to be the dream. I remember it. But from this perspective, the question is, where's the dreamer? Can you find the dreamer? If you take a very close look, there isn't one. And I'm going through something rather quickly that can take a little bit of practice. There isn't a dreamer. Not finding is the best finding. So what's going on here is this type of reflexive knowing. There's still something being perceived, but there's no perceiver. WTF is going on? The dream knows itself. There is no dreamer. And so in exactly the same way, when you ask, who is it that dies? It's the same thing. No thing. Emptiness, right? So I'm going to pause here because it's like, whoa, we're getting really subtle. We're going to the very limits of what dualistic language can do. Hence the invitation to do the contemplation, the investigation, the query. Sleep on it, dream on it, reflect on it, and then perhaps one day you'll go, OMG, there really isn't a dreamer. There really isn't a self experiencing this dream. And so here's let me just say one last thing about this, Tami, and this is really cool. So this ties in, and then I'll pause because I get so excited. So when you're in a dream, this is another way, similar type of contemplation, but I think even more revelatory. When you're in a dream, you can call that dreamer the dream avatar. You know, there's a feeling that, yes, I'm experiencing the dream, right? I'm a dream avatar, right? Well, we all have that when we dream. We create dream avatars every night. The little whirlpool, remember I used that image half an hour ago? This is a little whirlpool in the stream of your own mind. That's the avatar. Well, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you don't wail and weep and moan. You don't write an obituary. You don't call your friends that the dream avatar, oh my God, the dream avatar has died. Well, the dream avatar does die every morning when you wake up. What does the dream avatar do? It opens, reassociates into your stream at large. But you don't go wailing, weeping, and moaning when the dream avatar dies. And exactly, Tami, I cannot overemphasize the importance of this. In exactly the same way, you can extrapolate this insight to what's going to happen when we wake up or when we die in this life. Who we think we are right now is nothing more than this whirlpool to which we identify and clothed as Andrew and Tami. That is an avatar. When we die, just like the nighttime avatar dissolving into your mind stream, we are going to dissolve into the stream of mind at large. That's what death is. And if we can't relate to and identify with that infinite stream, I'm not that big, I'm not that majestic, I'm not everything. What are we going to do? We're going to whiplash, we're going to contract, we're going to create a new whirlpool farther down the stream. This time not going merrily, merrily down the stream, but merrily, merrily down the karmic toilet. Because we're unable to basically relate with this fundamental relaxation and the death of this avatar in relationship to the mind at large in exactly the same way that our dream avatar every night dissolves back into our own mind stream. If we really settle into this and reflect on this, not only does this have tremendous explanatory power, it helps us prepare for the end of life by preparing, by looking at what happens every single night when we fall asleep, dream, and wake up. Does this land with you? Does this click?
It does. It does. And for a moment, I want to ask you a question, though, about this what or who reincarnates, and it's our bad habits. And I thought to myself, well, isn't it also our good habits, like all of our habits, just all of them? Or is the fact that we have our habits running our life, should we call that bad? But I guess, you hear about people who, oh, that person has such quote unquote good karma.
Yeah.
Look at their life. They were born into a family where they encountered wisdom teachings, that had privileges of all kinds in terms of their early education, where they were loved or not. And I'm curious how you see in the reincarnation process the blueprint, if you will, of somebody's next life, the challenges that they have, the opportunities
Totally.
that they have. Sometimes people say, well, I felt like there was a meeting that happened before my incarnation and I raised my hand for certain sacred assignments or something like that. And I'm curious how the tradition looks at it and how you look at it.
Yeah, again, boy, these are such rich questions. So this ties in just parenthetically, very briefly, to that statement that I mentioned earlier from my dear friend Bob Thurman, when he says so compellingly, it's not safe to die as long as you still have an unconscious mind. Why is that? Well, because that, by the way, and the numbers here are really quite powerful. Check this out, Tami. Minimum, 95% of what we do is dictated by these unconscious processes. Talk about forgive them, Father, for they know not what we do. What they do, we live our lives basically buffeted around by 95% of our minds. And so what happens in the process of awakening and purification, in Western depth psychology really helps here, the work of Carl Jung and individuation and that kind of thing, is bringing unconscious processes into the light of consciousness to establish a relationship to these contents so that we can relate to them instead of from them. That's archetypal non-lucidity. And as we do that, two things are happening connected to your question. One is you, in fact, are bringing more of these unconscious processes into the light of consciousness. In geek speak, this is for the Buddhists who may be listening, this is the storehouse consciousness coming up and being, in a certain sense, emptied out and purified. So in association with that, as those are being brought up and purified, cleansed, the karma is being released and opened, simultaneously, bad habits are being replaced with good habits. Bad karma is being replaced with good karma until fundamentally the fruition is no habit, no karma. Only a Buddha from any tradition is habit-free. Only a Buddha is karma-free. Buddhas come back, just briefly, they come back not driven involuntarily by unconscious impulses of greed and passion and aggression and ignorance and jealousy and pride. These are the forces of the dark side that form us. The awakened ones come back, and this is important because in the Buddhist tradition, the point is not to get out of rebirth. The point is not to get out of reincarnation. The point is to get out of involuntarily, karmically driven, habitually driven reincarnation. So the fruition is to come back, this term, as a voluntary rebirther, a tulku, one who takes on form voluntarily out of love, kindness, and compassion. The great beings from any tradition do this. And so we can aspire for this kind of fruitional stance because we have the same minds as the awakened ones. And so when we're engaging in kindness and compassion and love, it's like the Dalai Lama and also Lama Zopa Rinpoche say so beautifully, loving kindness, or the awakened heart mind, what's called bodhicitta, lays down a red carpet for you in the bardos. Because if you stuff the ballot box, so to speak, with these noble good qualities, and this is really important for people who are not interested in Buddhism, they're not interested in Hinduism, they just want to have a good death. Well, you want to have a good death and a good birth, lead a good life. Because this is the type of, it's like I sometimes say this, it's like coming to the mafia and saying, I'll take care of it. Or coming to Mother Teresa and saying, I'll take care of it. Well, you're going to take care of it in different ways. And so if you can follow my metaphor here, my analogy, if we take good care of ourselves, if we take good care of others with love, kindness, and compassion, then it is in fact those good habits that will then rebirth. It is those good habits that will rebirth moment to moment, life to life, and dream to dream. You see this in your dreams. You see this maturation and developmental process take place in the dreams. As nightmares eventually diminish and cease, bad dreams are replaced with good dreams. Even good dreams are replaced with dreams of teachers and teachings. And then eventually, believe it or not, at a certain point, all dreaming ceases.
Please join us next week for part 2 of this interview. And if you'd like to watch Insights at the Edge on video and participate in the after-show Q&A session with our guests, come join us on Sounds True 1, a new membership community featuring award-winning original shows, live classes, community learning, guided meditations, and more with the leading wisdom teachers of our time. Use promo code PODCAST to get your first month free. You can learn more at join.soundstrue.com. Sounds True, waking up the world. The Sounds True Podcast Network.